Video ini dibuat sebagai tanggapan atas video ngawur dan putus asa dari tim Ezaraffleza yang berusaha mematahkan hasil riset Dan Gibson. Di sini dijelaskan lebih rinci penelitian Dan Gibson mengenai kota Mekah dan terbukti Islam tidak berawal dari Mekah.
Graveyards, one in Medina, one.
Dalam video sebelum ini, saya jelaskan kenapa dasar yang dipakai tim EZA lemah dan tidak bisa dijadikan dasar. Dasar satu-satunya yang dipakai tim EZA, yaitu Ptolemy geografi, tidak pernah dijadikan rujukan oleh para scholar. Karena banyaknya kesalahan di situ. Jadi sangat konyol, pembelaan yang dilakukan tim EZA dengan mengacu pada Ptolemy geografi yang banyak kesalahan di dalamnya. Namun kita juga tahu pasti, bahwa hal itulah satu-satunya yang bisa dilakukan Islam untuk membela diri. Sekarang kita simak penelitian Dan Gibson yang metodologis dan mengacu sepenuhnya pada temuan-temuan di lapangan sebagai pendukung testimoninya.
Writer and historian Dan Gibson has lived most of his life in the Middle East. He has extensively researched the peoples and places of the ancient world before Islam.
Sebelum video dilanjut, yang belum subscribe silahkan subscribe. Share sebanyak-banyaknya. Jangan lupa diklik tombol loncengnya, agar setiap ada video baru, Anda dapat notifikasinya. Like, share dan komen.
Why descriptions of Mecca do not tally with the landscape. In the city of Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, developers are digging all over, putting up great buildings, hotels and high-rises. But, to the surprise of archaeologists, there are no ruins of a great and ancient city under Mecca.
Tidak ditemukan sisa-sisa kota kuno di bawah Mekah, apa yang dikatakan bekas rumah Muhammad, Siti Khadijah dan Abu Bakar tanpa sepotong bukti arkeologi apapun yang mendukungnya. Bukti-bukti peninggalan arkeologis di kota Mekah tidak ada sama sekali, dan ini adalah fakta.
The city where Muhammad was born was a major city. It had no trouble in raising large numbers of men to work caravans and march in its armies. Not only did it have a significant population, but it was also an agricultural city.
The Prophet Muhammad would go forth for his affairs and journey far afield until he reached the glens of Mecca and the beds of its valleys. Aisha, Muhammad's wife, mentioned how one of the men was longing for Mecca. Would that I but stay overnight in a valley filled with various kinds of grass? When we came to Mecca, we saw a town blessed with water and trees, and delighted with it, we settled there. Al-Bukhari speaks of a prisoner who was eating grapes while he was chained in irons. And he says, "This was not the time of fruit in Mecca."
It's hard to believe that these things were written about Mecca. The area around Mecca is all rocks and desert. Mecca averages less than 10 centimeters of rain per year. With its extremely hot temperatures and barren conditions, this is scarcely enough to grow any vegetation at all, let alone grow enough food to support a large population. Yet, the holy city of Islam is described as having fields with trees and grass and soil. But there's no cultivatable land near Mecca. It doesn't match the ancient descriptions. Ibn Ishaq mentions that the people of Mecca were reluctant to cut down trees in the sacred area. The presence of trees and plants in ancient times can be easily tested by the presence of spores and pollen in undisturbed ancient soil. To date, there is no record of trees having ever existed in ancient Mecca.
Sudah kita lihat tadi hal pertama yang menjadi klaim Dan Gibson, yaitu mengenai gambaran geografi pada zaman Muhammad. Jelas sekali yang digambarkan mengenai Mekah tidak cocok sama sekali dengan fakta yang ada.
Apa yang dituliskan oleh Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham dan At-Tabari mengenai Mekah, adalah salah dan tidak cocok dengan keadaan yang sebenarnya.
Konklusinya, apabila yang mereka tuliskan itu benar, pasti yang mereka ceritakan itu bukanlah Mekah.
Atau yang lebih parah, apa yang mereka tuliskan itu salah. Nah, apabila demikian adanya tulisan-tulisan mereka itu, tidak bisa lagi dijadikan rujukan. Padahal, Al-Bukhari dalam hadisnya, menuliskan hal yang sama tentang kota Mekah.
Bayangkan, Al-Bukhari salah bercerita, otomatis, hadis tidak bisa lagi dijadikan rujukan.
Bagaimana Muslim? Atau, apabila yang mereka tuliskan adalah benar, pasti yang digambarkan di situ, bukanlah kota Mekah yang kita kenal.
Kita simak berikut ini.
Another puzzle is that the city of Mecca is missing on all early maps of Arabia. One would expect that a major merchant city would be mentioned on early maps, but not one shows Mecca before the time of Islam.
Over the years, I have gathered copies of many ancient maps of Arabia. I have diligently translated them, but never once did I find Mecca mentioned on a map before Islam. Did you know that the name Mecca does not appear in any literature prior to 740 AD? That's 120 years after the founding of Islam. Don't you find it puzzling that for the first 120 years of Islamic history, none of the surrounding nations knew anything about the existence of Mecca?
How could a major city, a city that could raise thousands of men in its army, a city that had agriculture, trees, grass, fruit and grapes, be missed by other nations? How could a major city?
Faktanya, 1. Keadaan geografi kota Mekah yang tertulis pada literatur-literatur Islam, tidak sesuai dengan kota Mekah yang kita kenal. 2. Kondisi vegetatif Mekah yang dituliskan, juga tidak sesuai dengan kota Mekah. 3. Mekah tidak tercantum pada peta-peta dagang abad ke-7 ke bawah. Hal ini membuktikan, yang dituliskan dalam literatur-literatur Islam, bukanlah kota Mekah yang kita kenal, tetapi kota yang lain. Apalagi ternyata pada tahun-tahun awal Islam keberadaan kota Mekah tidak nyata, tidak dikenal. Pertanyaan yang timbul, di manakah Muhammad lahir? Dari manakah sebenarnya Islam bermula? Apakah kisah Muhammad dan Islam yang selama ini dikenal ternyata salah? Mari kita pastikan.
Walls, temples, and public buildings not to be found in the annals of other nations, especially if it was a merchant city that undertook trade with all the nations around it. And most puzzling of all is that when we go to the physical location of this ancient city, we find that there is no early archaeological record. It was an insignificant location, not even on a trade route. Many historians today have come to the conclusion that the accounts of the founding of Islam are all myths. Obviously, there is a great discrepancy between what Islamic records tell us
Jadi ada perbedaan yang sangat besar antara apa yang dikatakan Muslim sebagai sejarah Islam dengan temuan-temuan arkeologis yang ada. Sehingga sejarah Islam yang ada saat ini sudah pasti salah. Dengan demikian dunia Islam dengan besar hati, harus men-setting ulang sejarahnya. Meskipun dengan resiko menenggelamkan Islam.
What the archaeologists have been finding, so the conclusion they draw is that the Islamic records are just fabricated myths.
In my years of study, I have become convinced that the early records are not myths, but that they refer to another location that fits all of these descriptions. I believe that Muhammad was born and raised in another place, and that Muslims are facing the wrong direction when they pray. According to commonly accepted Islamic history, the Kaaba was a major shrine in the city of Mecca and the focus of pilgrimage in Arabia. A good starting place might be studying the pilgrimage before the founding of Islam.
وكما دون المؤرخ الطبري بأن هناك كان نوعان من الحج والعمرة. الحج الأكبر أو الحج الأصغر. وكان جد محمد كان يؤدي العمرة قبل الإسلام.
Dicatat ya, haji dan umrah sudah dilakukan orang sebelum Islam. Dikatakan pula, kakek Muhammad sering melakukan umrah. Dengan begitu, sudah pasti bahwa haji dan umrah bukan ajaran Islam, tapi ritual pagan sebelum Islam yang ditiru Islam. Dan yang pasti, berhaji dan umrah tidak dilakukan di Mekah. Karena di depan sudah dijelaskan, Mekah tidak ada pada awal Islam. Apalagi haji dan umrah ternyata sudah dilakukan sebelum Islam ada. Kita lanjut videonya.
This umrah, before Muhammad, was at a time when the focal point of Arabian pilgrimage was to a place known as the Forbidden Gathering Place. This location held many pagan idols.
وهذه الأسماء كانت موجودة قبل الإسلام، ولكن ما زال المسلمين إلى حد هذا الآن يستخدمون نفس الأسماء، ولكن هي الأسماء هذه جتنا من الخارج، يعني من الوثنية، ليس أسماء إسلامية.
Allah has made Mecca a sacred sanctuary, and it was a sanctuary before and will be so after. None is allowed to uproot its shrubs, or cut its trees, or hunt its game.
So we have two descriptions of the original holy city of Islam. It was a haram place where killing was forbidden, and it was the focus of the pilgrimage for many centuries before the founding of Islam. Now look here. Much of the graffiti found throughout the Negev and southern Jordan was written by people on pilgrimage to the ancient city of Petra in southern Jordan. Thousands of people scratched their names and messages on rocks as they made their way to Petra for pilgrimage. This creates a problem for us. Mecca is unknown in maps and literature before and during the rise of Islam. The descriptions, such as the center of the trade route, the mother of all cities, and the focal point of the ancient pilgrimage, do not fit. How can we solve this? The answer to that comes direction of the Qibla today. However, the Quran tells Muslims they have a Qibla. The text of the Quran does not give the name of the city to which prayer was originally made. It only mentions Masjid al-Haram, or the Forbidden Gathering Place. Muslims believe they originally prayed towards Jerusalem.
We appointed the Qibla to you. Indeed, it was a momentous change, except to those guided by Allah. Allah would never make your faith of no effect. Now, shall we turn you to a Qibla that shall please you? Turn then your face in the direction of the Masjid al-Haram. Wherever you are, turn your faces in that direction.
As a historian of the Arabian Peninsula, I've always been interested in finding the location of the original Qibla. What direction did Muhammad pray towards before the Qibla was changed? Was it Jerusalem as some claim? Was it Syria as some claim? Or was it some other direction?
Dan Gibson akhirnya meneliti kiblat masjid-masjid tertua untuk data penelitiannya. Dan hasilnya, menguatkan penelitiannya mengenai gambaran kota Mekah yang salah. Dan fakta menunjukkan adanya kota yang lain.
And websites like ArcNet can combine the research of hundreds of students and professors. We can examine structures based on various criteria. We choose Islamic buildings, arrange them by date into a chronological list, then determine when they were constructed, check their Qibla direction by using Google Earth, and collate this to determine when the Qibla direction changed towards Mecca. This will give us solid data to work with.
Now, determining the Qibla direction is not an exact science. Some of the early mosques, like this one, are not exactly square. So researchers need to find the Qibla wall and project 90 degrees from that wall. Because early buildings were not square, we cannot use the side walls or the back walls. This is the mihrab of an old mosque. The early Arabs set the Qibla direction using the stars, and they were very accurate. The best way to determine the Qibla direction is to visit the mosque and use an actual accurate GPS unit. Not every mosque can be used for this study. Many of them were totally reconstructed over time, so much so that it is no longer possible to determine their original Qibla direction. However, a number of mosques survive. For instance, there is a mosque called the Mosque of the Two Qiblas in Medina. Islamic history tells us that it was in this very mosque that the companion leading prayers was told of the Qibla change. So he turned around and started praying towards Mecca. The question is, where did he originally face? Muslims have a ready answer. He prayed towards Jerusalem. Now today, the Mosque of the Two Qiblas faces Mecca. But in 1987, the mosque was completely torn down so it could be rebuilt. During the construction process, the old foundation was revealed, and they discovered that it did have a Qibla wall that did indeed face north, generally towards Jerusalem. And so Muslims believe originally the Qibla was towards Jerusalem.
There is a simple way that this can be put to the test. If we go to the earliest mosques that were built, where we can identify their direction of prayer, we can plot them on a map and see if their lines converge. We'll find one of three things. They all point in different directions. They all point to Jerusalem, or they all point to another location. After the Mosque of the Two Qiblas in Saudi Arabia, there are a further 11 early surviving mosques that we can research. These are located in China, Egypt, southern Jordan, Lebanon, central Jordan, Yemen, Israel, Iraq, Jerusalem, West Bank, and lastly Lebanon. So, if we go in the order that they were built, the second surviving mosque was built in Guangzhou, China. Guangzhou is the modern name for what was known as the city of Canton.
When Marco Polo reached this city in 1300 AD, he discovered over 100,000 Arab and Persian merchants living there. You see, the Arabs had been trading with the Chinese for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is all well documented. And so Abu Waqas, an uncle of Muhammad, traveled to China on a trade mission. And according to Chinese manuscripts, he built a mosque for the Arabs in Canton in 627 AD, or 6 years after the founding of Islam. I personally examined this mosque and used a GPS unit to determine the mosque's Qibla direction. What I found was surprising. This mosque does not face Mecca. It faces 12 degrees north of Mecca, meaning that it does not face Jerusalem either. Its Qibla passes south of Jerusalem.
The next mosque was built in 641 AD, about 20 years after the founding of Islam, in the town of Fustat, just outside of Cairo.
This mosque was rebuilt and enlarged several times, so that today the original foundation is no longer evident. However, a description of the original ground plan of the mosque survives, and the Islamic records tell us that the first Qibla pointed east and later had to be corrected towards the south, towards Mecca.
The next surviving Islamic building is the Umayyad Palace, built here at Humayma in southern Jordan.
Around 700 AD, or about 80 years after the founding of Islam, the Abbas family built a large manor house here. This house had no special mosque area. Rather, the faithful would line up here in the courtyard to pray. This house has a Qibla direction, but it is not towards Jerusalem.
The following year, a new mosque was built in Baalbek in Lebanon. Notice that its Qibla does not point to Mecca.
1 year later, the Umayyads built a large and impressive mosque here on the citadel in Amman, Jordan. This mosque points south. Mecca is over there.
A couple of years after this, in 705 AD, or 84 years after the founding of Islam, Muslims constructed the Great Mosque of Sana'a in the capital city of Yemen. While this mosque points in the general direction of Mecca, it actually points to the west of Jerusalem.
The following year, in 706 AD, the Umayyad Muslim rulers built Khirbat al-Minya, a large palace complex in Israel on the shores of Galilee. This palace complex had a specific room used as a mosque. According to the inscription set into a gateway, it was built 87 years after the founding of Islam by the Muslim ruler Al-Walid. This building and its mosque do not face Jerusalem. That same year, the Muslims also built the Wasid Mosque in Iraq. Originally, archaeologists claimed that this mosque pointed to Jerusalem. However, further research has shown that this mosque points south of Jerusalem.
The next mosque is the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem itself. This mosque is not the temple dome, but rather the old mosque to the south of the dome. This mosque is already in Jerusalem, but it also has a Qibla, and it does not point to Mecca. The next mosque we come to was built in 724 AD, 103 years after the founding of Islam. This is the Khirbat al-Mafjar Mosque near Jericho in the Jordan Valley. This palace was built near the end of the Umayyad dynasty. By looking at the floor plan, we can see that the palace and its mosque faced south rather than towards Mecca. That same year, a mosque was built at Anjar, about 58 kilometers from Beirut. It was built near the end of the Umayyad period, and no more than 30 years later, it fell into ruins and eventually was abandoned. Since it was never rebuilt, we can easily determine the Qibla direction, which does not point towards Mecca or Jerusalem. Now, let's put this all together onto one map. The result is amazing. During the first 100 years of Islam, 100% of all the surviving mosques we have located so far face a spot in southern Jordan rather than Mecca. From north, south, east and west, mosques all face towards one spot. This isn't some small error in determining the Qibla direction. They all specifically point to just one place.
Directly under this point is the ancient city of Petra.
Hasilnya, semua masjid tua yang masih bisa diteliti Dan Gibson. Kiblatnya menghadap ke kota kuno Petra di Yordania Selatan. Jadi, sampai 100 tahun sejak Islam berdiri arah kiblat ke Petra.
This is a city that is well known to us today. It is a popular tourist site. Tourists come from all over the world to marvel at the great temples and the monuments in this city. Could it be that Petra is the mother of all cities described in the Quran? It was the focus of the ancient Arab pilgrimage. So could Petra also be the birthplace of Muhammad and the founding city of Islam?
But does the city of Petra fit the Islamic descriptions of the original holy city of Islam?
There is a story told by all of the early biographers of Muhammad. It concerns Abdullah, Muhammad's father. He was working in the field one day and he came home with dirt on his hands. He went into his first wife and said, "Lie with me," but she refused because he was dirty. So he went out, washed off the soil, went into his next wife, Amina. She conceived, and in this way Muhammad was born. What is important to us about this story is that all of the early writers use the same word for the dirt on Abdullah's hands. They all use an Arabic word for soil, especially the soil of a cultivated plot or field. The problem is, there is no cultivatable land near Mecca. However, when we come to Petra, we discover that Petra had water, fields, and trees.
According to archaeologists, there were private and public gardens, as well as running water brought into the city through aqueducts and clay pipes. Archaeologists have described fruit trees, grapes, and gardens existing in ancient Petra. Even today, there are cultivated plots of land between Petra and El Beida, which is 5 kilometers.
Sudah kita lihat tadi, bahwa gambaran kota suci yang dikisahkan dalam literatur-literatur Islam tidak cocok dengan Mekah. Semua yang dikisahkan dalam literatur-literatur Islam tidak ada pada kota Mekah. Sebaliknya, semua yang digambarkan mengenai kota suci Islam ada di Petra, baik itu kondisi geografi dan adanya tanam-tanaman, berikut lahan pertanian. Jadi, apabila Muslim percaya bahwa Islam bermula dari Mekah, maka juga harus percaya bahwa literatur-literatur Islam itu salah, dan itu adalah masalah besar. Tetapi, berdasarkan literatur-literatur Islam dan diperkuat oleh hasil-hasil penelitian Dan Gibson, terbukti awal Islam bukan di Mekah, tapi di Petra. Tidak ada dasar apapun yang dapat membantah temuan Dan Gibson. Apakah pemerintah kerajaan Saudi berani mengizinkan para arkeolog meneliti pondasi dasar Ka'bah dan Masjidil Haram? Sehingga, bisa diketahui dengan pasti usia kedua bangunan itu.